Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend, where we go behind the scenes and talk to the creators of independent entertainment. I'm Jason Godbey, and today we've got another movie review episode for you. And to help me talk about some films that we saw recently is Mr. E.J. Argenio. Welcome
Jason,
back, EJ.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as always.
Welcome back to the rabbit hole, my brother.
Well, it's good to be here.
All right, so we got a couple. This is a little bit of an unusual episode. We've got a couple of documentaries and a short to talk about.
Buffet. It's a nice buffet.
It's a nice little indie buffet we got going on. The first movie we wanted to talk about was a film that I saw. It was screened at Sundance. I did not go to Sundance, unfortunately, but I saw it here in New York before it screened out there. It's a film called Once Upon a Time in Venezuela.
Yes.
And then we're going to talk about another documentary that was distributed by the same company called Satan and Adam. First of all, just to give you a little bit of background on this movie, Once Upon a Time in Venezuela is about a village that is it's entirely on a lake. The people use the lake for everything.
Okay.
So they fish out of it, they swim in it, they wash their laundry in it, they brush their teeth with it, they drink out of it. The lake is basically everything. And everyone's home is built on these stilts for the most part around the lake. The homes in themselves are very like sort of provincial and very like basic needs of a home. They have things like electricity for the most part, which I'm guessing comes from a generator.
It's not a DirecTV premium package, is what I'm assuming, that type of situation.
You don't see a lot of internet there, but people do have smartphones.
Yeah.
Which I thought was weird. This is started filming in like 2015, I think.
Okay.
And they filmed there for over a year. When you do see the smartphone come out, it's a little bit like, you feel like it's anachronistic. You feel like, oh my God, where did that come from? Because everything looks like it's been there for forever. The way I describe it in the review that I wrote is it's a film by a people for those people and made by an insider. So like it's very like it doesn't.
There's no filmmaker mission behind telling this story beforehand.
It doesn't feel like there's an imposed agenda.
But there's still a story.
There's still a story. The story is basically it's a political one. So this village is basically dying.
Okay.
The water level is going down due to climate change. There's more and more sedimentation in there, and the people are trying to get rid of it. And they're asking their government for help. And the Venezuelan government, if you know anything about Venezuelan politics, it's basically a mess.
Do they get into much of the political ramifications because of the current state of the government?
A little bit. They do have this thing where...
But nothing from a government perspective, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, they don't. You never really talk to anybody who... You never talk to anybody who is a government representative. There's two women that basically, if you look at the setup, there's kind of like these two women that are on different sides of the same issue. So there's one woman her name is Tamara, and she is an old-fashioned, she's a businesswoman. She's got like a farm on the lake, and she's a old-fashioned Chavist. So she's with the current regime that was at the time. Venezuela has changed quite a bit since the movie. And then there's a school teacher who's kind of fighting for this one-room schoolhouse that she teaches in. All the kids basically go to school in this one-room schoolhouse, and they literally like ferry each other to school. Like, so you'll see like a 10-year-old ferrying a smaller child to school kind of thing.
Now, much like modern small-town situations, conditions, I don't know, call it what you will, do people get out? Do they look to leave the local community, or is it something that, the future paves the way for the next generation and so on and so forth, where, whether it be moving to other parts of Venezuela or, outside of the country altogether, is that something they want, or the sustainability of this small community becomes a priority for the children once they reach adolescence or adulthood?
It is an old town, so like generations have been there,
Yeah.
From what I gather. But because of what's happening to the lake, people are being forced to move.
Okay.
So you have these people who this is the only life they've ever known, ever. And now they literally, at some points in the film, you see people prying up their homes off of these stilts and putting them on pontoons and boats and having them motorboated away.
Wow.
So that they can move to town. And Tamara, she goes into the closest city in Venezuela, and you're like, wait, how did I get... It's almost jarring to see somebody like in a car and like not in a boat.
I'm not laughing at the conditions, but it's just there's a certain aspect to a community when a car seems very futuristic.
Yeah, it feels like these people, this is the way they've lived their whole lives, and this is the way they want to live, but then it just becomes unsustainable. The filmmaker, her name is Anabel Rodriguez Rios. She's Venezuelan.
Yes.
And what you get from this perspective is she's kind of like, she's she's one of them. You feel like this is a film made by an insider. So like the first scene, the first opening of the film is just floating along, the camera floating along the lake and capturing these various different people start their day. Almost like Man with a Movie Camera or something like that. Like very kind of fly on the wall perspective of it.
Was there a lot of archival footage, or was it one of those situations
Not really,
where
no.
anything from, you said 2015, so I guess that was the starting point for anything you saw.
Yeah, it was basically like the people who made this said, okay, here's the starting point, and we're going to stick with this and see what happens. You do have this feeling of like being in this world, like being enveloped by this world. And the movie also does not take, it does two things that's very unusual, I think, for documentary film these days. It does not take sides. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't say Natalie's right or
no agenda.
It doesn't seem to have one, no. And maybe that's because I didn't read the Spanish titles fast enough. You watch it and you're forced, especially as an outsider, you're forced to piece the movie together based on the gist of what they're talking about.
But isn't that a good thing? Like you even just said you wanted to, you felt engulfed in the community as though you were a part of it. I think you find that more with narrative filmmaking rather than documentary filmmaking for the most part nowadays, at least from my perspective. I mean, there's probably thousands of people out there who disagree with me, and that's fine. But for a documentary to do that, especially a place that's real. It's one thing making up a town and feeling like you're a part of that community, but for something to have been around for so long and have its own identity and its own culture, obviously, to feel a part of that, especially as an American, I would say that's a successful job by them.
I definitely praise the movie for that, but the thing is, like, if you're not used to it, it's something you need to kind of let grow on you, because especially now, like for a lot of American documentaries, you see documentary filmmakers who put themselves in the movie. That definitely, like a Michael Moore or something like that.
Was there a narration?
No, there wasn't really. Every once in a while, you heard the filmmaker ask a question, but that was it.
Okay.
For the most part, it's people in their own homes and talking about their life, and sometimes you just feel like the camera is just another part of the conversation. There's this one scene toward the end of the film where Natalie, the teacher, is talking to, I think, one of her children, and they're just kind of swimming, floating in the water, and this kid is like, yeah, this place is unsustainable, like we can't stay here. Like this is a child just looking around, seeing its world and going.
And he clearly wasn't coached or directed into that sort of response. And I guess, would you say it's a median between reality filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, or at least documentaries is we're used to it nowadays?
I think it's a more pure form of documentary filmmaking that it doesn't, and it's unusual because usually and along with not taking sides, it also doesn't stop and explain anything to you, which, as somebody who's not familiar with Venezuelan politics, I kind of could have used. There's a little bit in the beginning, and then you're off to the races, whereas normally if you were an American making this movie about this other culture, there would be this kind of like thing where you stop and go, hey, here's the score, kind of thing. This is the situation.
Well, that makes me think they almost made this more for the people of Venezuela who sort of understand all of that, and any outside viewership that they get, they'll just use as a bonus, but it was more for the people outside of this community who are in Venezuela, who know the state of affairs already, for them to be further educated. That's the way I take it.
It does feel a bit like this is a culture and this is a movie for that culture, but what's interesting about being not of that culture is that you get to see this really realistic side of people in this very sort of pure form of filmmaking, where you feel like a fly on the wall, you feel like the camera is just a third member of a conversation, and you're enveloped by the movie. The movie doesn't stop for you.
Okay.
So it's like if you don't hit the ground running with the movie.
But don't you like when they break down those fourth walls like that?
I mean, sometimes I appreciate somebody saying, hey, here's the history of Venezuelan politics, like a Rachel Maddow report where she contextualizes everything for an hour before she talks about it.
So basically, could have used some not subtitles, but like captions before and after the movie. This is where we stand, and this is where we left off. Sort of.
There's
deal.
a tiny bit of it in the beginning of the film, and then you're just off to the races. But the other thing too is that because of the setting, it's set on this lake. And, it's Venezuela. It's hot. It's like
Yeah.
right near the equator. But, like, everybody is just so casual. Like, nobody puts on any airs for the camera. It's like they're not even being filmed.
Well,
you know
that's what happens when you have the comfort of an insider making that film.
Right. Like, if you or I tried to make that movie.
Yeah, I think it would be looked at a little differently.
And people, we would get a whole different perspective because we would affect the situation. It's like the observer effect. Like, you would affect the situation just by being there, just by looking at it. But because Rodriguez Rios is she's from there, you get the feeling that she's just one of them. And it's like, oh, let's talk to Annabelle for a little bit, and she just happens to have a camera on.
And it's hard to establish that type of trust as an outsider, and a lot of time has to be put into that. You have to either be dedicated to a subject or already be living there for a certain period of time to make that type of documentary.
Absolutely. Anyway, we're going to move on to the next film, which you did see.
I did see.
So it's called Satan and Adam. You want to give a little background on Satan and Adam?
Mr. Satan is, Sterling McGee is his real name and is this old blues musician, not jazz according to him, but more blues musician who played with the likes of Ray Charles and James Brown, and a fixed performer on the streets of Harlem in the 1980s after he took more of a solo route, but was doing this more for his own. He wasn't looking to become a big rock star or big, blues star anymore, but he was more or less giving the entertainment back to the people and was playing for whatever money they can contribute on the streets of Harlem in the mid to late 80s.
Yeah, this is a guy who's basically, he'd been in the system, he'd been in the music business, and now he was fed up by the system and left. And now he's just being like sort of a pure musician doing his own thing.
And that brings us to Adam Glusow, who makes the other part of Satan and Adam, and that's what the band would eventually be called. But he shows up after breaking up with a girlfriend, and he talks about going to the Upper West Side and how he's left very vulnerable at this point. And
the movie starts back in the movie
86.
It starts in 1986.
Yeah.
So this is a time when like white guys didn't go up to Harlem.
Well, and talking about context, they deal with that idea of the racial divide in New York and how New York was one of the more dangerous places for racially charged crimes and murders. And basically, Adam takes the trip up there. Here's Mr. McGee playing, Mr. Satan playing. He didn't even know that was his name at that time. And it struck a chord. And I think that really, an emotional chord. And that's what I love about music. We talk about films here, and I've seen theater, but I'm a fan of the arts. And music is one of them. I've been to numerous concerts. I have, certain bands that I'll even try to travel around and follow and see. And that feeling of community, and especially how music at a certain point in your life can make more sense than it would have 5 years before, is really a theme in this film. And, starts this relationship. He basically, something as simple as, do you mind if I play with you? And he has his harmonica, and he begins playing with Mr. Satan, and the crowd begins to take notice, and this relationship develops. And lo and behold, 30-some-odd years later, we have this documentary on Netflix.
From his perspective, and I relate to this guy because, I'm a musician myself, and I love blues music, which is why I watched it.
Educated, by the way, Princeton undergrad,
yeah,
Columbia master's degree.
This guy's got a heavy education and decides kind of like to opt out of life to start playing music with this guy because they're good, and they start drawing crowds. And there's animosity also that they have to deal with. He's this white boy playing up in Harlem, and that's not easy. I've been that guy. I know what it's like to be in a club and be like, hey, what's this guy doing?
Well, it just shows you that because the consensus feels a certain way doesn't mean everyone does. Because Mr. Satan looks at him as another performer. He has no problem. He realizes the biggest thing he's doing is aiding to the music. He's making the performances better, and he's making him better as a guitar player and a singer. So Adam is not only contributing to the social context, but he's also contributing as an artist and bringing something to the table. And what I found very interesting was how, after that first show, Mr. Satan asked him to come back the next day, and he did, and they began routinely performing with one another. And something we should note is there's like a 30-year gap in their, age difference, but they find that, music is that nucleus that combines them. And so when they're splitting up, the dollars or whatever anyone could throw into the bucket or the guitar, bag and dividing that up after a performance, I found two things very interesting. One, everything would be 50-50. Two, any spare change that was thrown in, Mr. Satan, Sterling McGee, did not want that money divided amongst them. He believed there were people even lower than them, people who didn't have music to fall on and couldn't raise a dollar based on their artistic creativity. And that money, he said, should go back to those who can't fend for themselves. And I thought that was really interesting. It shows you, the soul behind Mr. Satan.
It sort of reinvigorates Sterling McGee because he's a guy who's opted out, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He's the musical equivalent of a hermit that goes to live on the hill, kind of thing. And he was on I believe it was Ray Charles's label for a while.
Tangerine.
Yeah,
Tangerine, yes.
He was on that label, and he realized that, being on that label, he was never going to be as big as like Ray Charles. And
his name was never on the marquee.
Yeah, his name was never going to be on the marquee, and he was very fed up with like the A&R men and all that kind of stuff. So what Adam does is eventually Adam realizes, he's like, hey, this is good.
We have something here.
We have a chemistry, we have music that works, and it's really good. So we should do something about it. And they cut an album. And then next thing you know, they're playing music festivals and they're touring and all this.
And they have a manager, and then they have having a producer, and I really was intrigued by the way Mr. Staten took this in. I don't know if they decided to keep that out of the documentary, if that was we talk about
a lot of it is
agenda.
told from Adam's perspective.
It is told from Adam's perspective, and I think what's intriguing is you don't hear much of the brushback from Mr. Satan. You would think there would be some sort of resistance. I don't want to get into this, type of life.
There probably was.
Yeah, they kind of overshadow.
Yeah, I don't think. Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff that you don't see that's kind of told to you a lot from Adam's perspective, and I think at times they were interviewing Adam when Mr. Satan was not in the picture anymore. He kind of disappears at one point during the film.
Yep.
And I think that's partially why it's from Adam's perspective, because they could get more from him.
Well, and what was so weird
just
too,
logistically,
was how it seemed like the documentary was taking place for over 30 years, though most of the footage was recent from.
Yeah. They also had
Adam.
Archival footage as well.
Yes.
From what so.
And then Edge from U2 seeing them at a certain point.
He played a song on U2's album.
Well, was it the film they did? I don't remember. I believe
it's
U2 had a film they did, and they said Adam's not mentioned, but Mr. Satan is, or he might have even just been listed as Sterling McGee.
Right.
But Edge makes a point to note that it is the only track by anyone outside of the band on any one of their albums still to this day.
A lot of things that I liked about it were the chemistry and the conflict between these two guys, and the story of like this bromance that goes on,
which they actually call it in the film.
If you're not a musician, it's hard to explain this, but there are times when you go to a jam session, or like I've literally been like sitting in a guitar store, and somebody's playing, and I'll pick up and I'll start playing with them, and you sort of meet musically before anybody's said who they are. You don't introduce yourself. You just start playing tunes.
The beauty
together.
of the riff.
Yeah,
beauty of the riff.
And then like there's this magic thing that happens, and it doesn't matter. You could be a lefty Democrat, and they could be a Republican, or you could be they could be strictly religious, and you're an atheist. It doesn't matter.
Music unifies us in its own way,
and that's really what the story is about, in my opinion. That's kind of like
they had a commercial aspect, but it wasn't about the commercial aspect. It was more just, this is the story of who we were and the relationship we built, and how that's centered around this creativity from both of their ends. I mean, one couldn't have made it without the other, and I don't think there was that. They weren't Simon and Garfunkel. I don't think there was that resentment outside of, and I think he had earned it. You hear the one point where they get to one of these shows, and at the marquee it says Adam and Satan, and he says, no, my name goes first.
Right.
And, I think. What I loved about it the most, I mean,
like he's a good guy, but he's not without ego.
Yeah, a little bit. I think a well-deserved ego. It's not just him, believing he's better than everyone, but it's for where he is in his life and for what he's done previously.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I own at least this much, and I really respect, Adam coming out, and that I think the biggest thing I took from it is the willingness to roll the dice, take a chance on an opportunity or a person. And I really had one of the things my father said to me in the last few years of his life that really resonated with me is, you never know who you're going to meet. And he meant it in a professional sense, personal too, to a degree, but just more, we talk about films. We live in an artistic world. When you're doing a job like this or a profession like this, a life like this, you meet people in sometimes the strangest, oddest moments. And, sometimes there's an opportunity that's there that you need to be willing to see. Because if you don't, 30 years of greatness can just go by like that.
First of all, it's an achievement for a filmmaker because they're gathering 30-odd years of archival footage. They're keeping with the story over years. The one thing because of the perspective and I don't know if you felt this way, I kept going, what's going to happen next? Like, is this guy? Because when you first started, is he still alive? Did he die at one point?
I know.
What happened? Why are they still together? Like, what's going on? And it does take you on this like time journey.
And there's an emotional journey and arc to it. Like, it's not. It's not just informative and then you get to the emotional peak and then you get to the resolution. I think it has a nice, it does a good job, especially in a film, in a documentary that's only, an hour and 17 minutes long.
Yeah, it's not even that long.
It feels like a full film, but not in a, it's a feature, but it feels like an hour and 30, hour and 45 minute feature documentary, even though it's shorter. And that's not because it's dull or boring. There's just a lot of meat.
Yeah.
Inside this, small sandwich.
Another credit I would give to the filmmakers too is it doesn't overstay its welcome like a lot of films do. Like every film now seems to be like it's like over 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 40 minutes, and you're like, all right, like I know that you're trying to give me, I guess, more bang for my buck or something. At the
and I guess
theater,
in its own way, it doesn't take itself too seriously either. And I think that's why they're able to achieve a lot of those instead of giving you, too much information or stuff that, I don't know how these interviews went. I don't know how they cut it down, but they might have touched upon points, during these sit downs that they could have kept it in, but they knew, in the greater, the skeleton of the film was not going to hit on any of those points. So we're better off eliminating it now. And they keep it short, sweet, and simple, and you feel fulfilled.
We got one more film to talk about, and it's a good thing it's a short film because we're running out of time. What Did Jack Do? Which is directed by David Lynch. This film's on Netflix. Yep. It's a short film. It's a 17-minute film, David Lynch. If you had to say, what is the movie about plot-wise?
Jack's a monkey. He did something wrong, and David Lynch plays a police detective who comes to interrogate him and find out the true story. And I think that's even being generous.
Yeah, it's unusual that there's a lot of this dialogue that's like sort of this like animal pun patter kind of thing that happens and very sort of surrealistic. It's almost like
you could spend a semester's worth of interpretation in a film class and I think still have difficulty deciphering what certain things actually mean because the story was not part of this, agenda. It was not the focal point. It was more, I've reached this age. I am who I am. Let me take another artistic challenge with a short film and do something that hasn't been done. And listen, we're talking about it. Netflix picked it up as a short.
Netflix picked it up because of David Lynch.
But that's what I mean. He knew someone would,
right.
With his background. He brings the credibility, and by starring in it and by playing, I found that interesting. He plays the voice of Jack, which they do very,
they kind of alter it in a way.
It's very student film, college TV-esque.
Right.
I also like how, he gives the credit at the end of the film to, Jack
Cruz.
Jack Cruz, right? Yeah, it is Cruz.
Jack Cruz, the monkey. This, to me, it's like, this is... and I feel like this about most David Lynch films. Mm-hmm. You're either on board for this or you're not, because it's just weird and out there. It's kind of like avant-garde. It's genreless in a way. Like if you maybe people,
it feels like an old Hollywood crime story, one of those interrogations,
like a very film noir-esque kind of thing. But is it funny? Is it like I don't know. I want people out there, if you watch this movie, tweet at us at BTR Productions and tell us what you think of it, because it's weird and it's just. It's David Lynch. It's like the most David Lynch I've ever seen in a movie.
And I'll leave it at this. I guess we've heard stories of how people can turn off some of his works before because it just drags on, and he's very set in his ways at this point. But
this movie is tight paced, though.
It is, and for 17 minutes, you may say to yourself, "What the hell did I just watch?" But for 17 minutes, why not? When was the last time you watched something, even a short, and go, "What the hell was that?"
And it's the type of thing too where if David Lynch is the buffet, this is like a nice little salad. It's like a little appetizer of a movie, to get you in. It's like a gateway drug. If you like it, maybe you'll like other David Lynch.
And I guess
stuff.
Since we're talking about him, congratulations should go out for his honorary Oscar that he was awarded, and it was mentioned during the most recent ceremonies. But I guess that was months back that was given to him. And
I think David Lynch of himself, you either get him or you don't. I think I wouldn't call myself a David Lynch fan, and I've been.
I don't think he wants fans either.
I don't know what. Well, that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. But I feel like I do feel like this is a man with a singular vision, who knows what he wants. And at this point he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't care about critics. I don't care about audiences. I'm just going to put up what I want. If somebody wants to buy it, great. But I'm David Lynch. I'm going to make art.
These are the movies I make.
So I'm going to wrap up. If people want to find you or follow you, where can they find you on the web?
EJR Genio. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. EJR Genio. That's the letters E and J, followed by Argenio. ARGENIO. Jason, thank you again so much. This has been great.
Yeah, it's fun, man. We'll have to do these more often, and hopefully people will like them out there, and we'll request more movies. What do you want us to review next? Tweet at us and let us know at BTR Productions. And once again, thank you for taking this trip down the rabbit hole. For more of our content, including our movie reviews, you can find them on our website, norestoftheweekendpodcast.com. EJ is a contributor there. I write reviews. We've also had a couple of other people, William Hammond and now Andrew Sweatman, have contributed reviews. They're other film bloggers, so it's great to get more voices.
Went to college with Bill.
That's awesome, yeah. So we have some different people. If you're interested in doing that, let us know as well. But for Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.